His mother sent him to swim in the sea, but he chose to sit quietly on the shore instead. Suddenly, he noticed a large egg half buried in the water. He took it out and studied it carefully, just as his mother arrived and told him to come home. Angus quickly hid the egg in his bucket and followed Annie back. Annie was upset because Angus hadn't even tried to swim. He didn't argue. As soon as they reached home, he slipped away to his father's workshop. Soon, his sister Christy returned and asked Annie what Angus had done at the sea today. Annie replied that he'd just sat alone, as usual. Meanwhile, Angus put down his things in the workshop, which belonged to his father Charlie, who was away fighting in the army. Angus looked at his father's picture, then at the calendar, wondering when Charlie would come home. Next, he washed the egg, peeled off its outer layer, and was amazed to see a bright blue interior. Before the egg could hatch, Annie called him again, so he left it behind and hurried inside. That night, heavy rain began, and Angus feared the egg wouldn't be safe in the workshop. He dashed back in the downpour, only to find it had already cracked open. He peered inside and saw a strange creature. When he reached out, it snapped at him, and Angus realized it was probably just hungry. He sprinted to get some food, and when he returned, the creature was calmer as he fed it. Angus was gently feeding his new friend when Annie called once more. Reluctantly, he went to bed. The next morning, Angus woke to find a squad of soldiers at his door. He, Annie, and Christy greeted Captain Hamilton, who explained that enemy forces might try to invade by sea. His soldiers would stay at their house and prepare to defend the coast. The soldiers brought in supplies and set up their stations. Annie told Christy and Angus to stay in their room. Later, Angus went to the library to find a book about the mysterious creature. With the book in hand, he hurried back to the workshop, only to find it in chaos and the creature chewing Charlie's boots. Realizing it was still hungry, Angus went to the kitchen for more food, but Sergeant Strunk, the army cook, stopped him at the door. Angus pleaded that the creature needed to eat, but Strunk refused. Then Angus offered to take out the kitchen garbage, and Strunk agreed. Using scraps from the bin, Angus fed his new friend, who ate eagerly. Angus named him Crusoe. After eating all the scraps, Crusoe swam happily in a bin of water that Angus filled. Meanwhile, Captain Hamilton drilled his men relentlessly, insisting they stay ready for an enemy attack at any moment. Angus left Crusoe alone in the workshop and slipped away so Annie wouldn't notice. Later, a man named Lewis arrived in town and went straight to the workshop where Annie was working. He asked for a job, and Annie told him he would first have to clean the entire workshop. Lewis agreed and started right away. While cleaning, he carried out the dustbin where Angus had hidden Crusoe. When Angus saw this, he raced over to stop Lewis, but the bin was empty. Angus demanded to know who Lewis was and what he was doing in his father's workshop. He reminded Lewis that his father Charlie would soon return from the war. Lewis replied, "Look, brother, your father can claim the workshop when he comes back, but until then, I'm in charge here." Realizing Crusoe was in danger, Angus hurried back inside, then began searching the house for a safe spot. Meanwhile, Crusoe had slipped into the house. Sergeant Strunk's dog, Churchill, spotted him and chased after him, but the dog was chained and couldn't catch him. Crusoe darted into the bathroom just as Christy walked in. She screamed and ran upstairs. Angus calmed her down and explained that Crusoe was his pet, hatched from the strange egg he'd found by the sea. Christy was shaken but promised not to tell Annie, since Crusoe wouldn't harm anyone. Back in the workshop, Annie handed Lewis some of Charlie's clothes to launder. Lewis hesitated and asked if Charlie might never return. With a heavy heart, Annie admitted that Charlie had died when his ship sank at sea. Then Annie asked Lewis to fix a leak in the bathroom. When Lewis knocked on that very bathroom door, Angus and Christy tried to keep him out. After a long silence, Lewis threatened to tell Annie what they were hiding. Finally, Christy was forced to open the door. Lewis stepped in and said he'd come to fix the leak. Then suddenly his eyes fell on Crusoe. He froze and nervously asked, "What is that?" Angus told him Crusoe's whole story. Lewis looked surprised and reached out to touch him, but Crusoe snapped at his hand. Lewis exclaimed that Crusoe looked exactly like a seahorse, one of the rarest animals in the world. Legend says only one seahorse exists at a time. When one dies, a new egg hatches and a new seahorse is born. He told them about the seahorse's magical powers, just as Annie knocked on the door. Angus begged Lewis to help hide Crusoe, since Annie would never allow him in the house. Lewis agreed. When Annie entered, she saw no creature, though Crusoe peeped out from his hiding spot, and Lewis smoothly distracted her. Later, when Annie stepped outside, she met Captain Hamilton, who invited her to the soldiers' dinner. That night, Lewis told Angus they should return Crusoe to the sea, his true home, but Angus refused, insisting Crusoe belonged with him. Soon, the soldiers' dinner began at the house. Angus left Crusoe in the bathroom while he helped serve and forgot to close the door. Crusoe seized the chance and escaped. Meanwhile, Sergeant Strunk's dog, Churchill, caught Crusoe's scent and went wild searching for him. When Churchill spotted Crusoe, he chased him through the house, leaped onto the dining table, and ruined the entire feast. Everyone scolded Churchill, who was in for a beating. Crusoe darted outside and jumped into the fountain, where he happily found fish to eat. Angus frantically searched for Crusoe. Lewis reassured her he would safely find and return the creature. Angus headed home, and after much searching, Lewis discovered Crusoe, now much larger than before. Lewis called Angus, and when Angus saw Crusoe's growth, he realized it was time to let him go. Together, they loaded Crusoe into the back of a truck and drove to the seashore. With heavy hearts, they released him into the water. Angus was heartbroken, but knew he had no choice. The next day, two fishermen, Jimmy and his friend Huey, were out at sea when Huey felt a heavy tug on their rope. As he pulled, their boat began to sink. Suddenly, a giant Crusoe emerged in front of them. Both men were stunned. Huey wanted to capture the creature, dreaming of the fortune it could bring, but Jimmy refused. Crusoe started dragging the sinking boat away from shore. Jimmy cut the rope to save their lives, and as he watched Crusoe swim off, he marveled. He had never seen such a bizarre, magnificent animal before. Meanwhile, Captain Hamilton told Angus that his mother wanted him to begin army training right away. Angus joined the soldiers and helped with their tasks, but after a few days he grew bored. One morning, he slipped away from Captain Hamilton and ran down to the sea. He shouted for Crusoe, but there was no sign of him. Angus climbed into a small boat and rowed out to look. Soon, Crusoe burst from the water beside him, and Angus was amazed at how huge he had become. With a powerful leap, Crusoe lifted Angus onto his back. Though frightened at first, Angus relaxed and enjoyed the thrilling sea ride. When Crusoe returned him to shore, Sergeant Strunk's dog Churchill caught his scent and bolted toward the water. Strunk followed in astonishment. He had never seen such a large, strange creature, and could hardly believe his eyes. That night, Angus excitedly told Christy and Lewis about his adventure. They laughed and cheered, their joy echoing through the house. Annie, watching from the doorway, smiled and turned to leave. Lewis followed her, and Annie thanked him. Because of Lewis, she'd finally seen her children laugh freely again. Lewis just chuckled and walked away. Meanwhile, Jimmy was telling a reporter named Jock about the strange animal he'd encountered at sea. Jock thought that news of such a creature could attract investors and tourists to the city. Huey argued that the town was fine as it was, but Jock insisted that people had a right to know about a potentially dangerous sea animal. The next day, Hamilton led Annie and her children to a nearby hill to show them his army's preparations and demonstrate the weapons used against enemies. He ordered his men to perform mock attacks on targets hiding in the water. Angus realized this could endanger Crusoe and begged Annie to stop the exercise. Annie couldn't understand his urgency and told him to stand still. Even Christie's plea that Angus was telling the truth fell on deaf ears. The soldiers began firing blanks into the shallows, and Crusoe, terrified, struggled desperately to escape. Jimmy and Jock had come to the shoreline hoping to photograph Crusoe, but the animal remained hidden. Frustrated, they built a crude effigy, took its picture, and published it in the next day's newspaper. A few days later, when Sergeant Strunk saw the image, he recognized the terrifying creature he'd glimpsed by the sea. Strunk and several soldiers vowed to track down Crusoe and kill him. That night, Christie crept into Angus's room. The two ran away from home, guiding Lewis to the seashore to check on Crusoe. Angus called out, and after a tense moment, Crusoe surfaced, but he was wild and unrecognizable. He charged past Angus and Lewis, who watched in horror. Crusoe dove back beneath the waves. Angus blamed Lewis. Their decision to release Crusoe had unleashed this danger. Meanwhile, Strunk and his men hunted for Crusoe by boat, intent on killing him. As they neared shore, Churchill's frantic barking alerted them. Strunk ordered the boat toward the sound, and in an instant, Crusoe emerged and killed Churchill. Then silence fell over the beach once more. The soldiers couldn't understand what was happening and opened fire toward the water. Suddenly, Crusoe slammed into their boat and threw them all overboard. When Hamilton heard the gunfire, he assumed the enemy had attacked. He ordered his men to counterattack and told Annie to hide in the house with the children. Annie found Christie and asked where Angus was. Christie said he wasn't home, and Annie panicked. She couldn't leave Angus alone in a battle zone. Insisting on finding him, she followed Hamilton down to the shore despite his attempts to keep her safe. Out on the water, Crusoe had gone wild. He grabbed Sergeant Strunk in his jaws and tossed him about like a rag doll. Angus arrived just in time and shouted at Crusoe, but the creature ignored him. Angus waded into the shallows to reach Crusoe, but slipped and began to drown. Seeing this, Crusoe dropped Strunk and rushed back to save Angus, dragging him to shore. Lewis joined them, and they worked desperately to revive Angus. After a tense moment with no sign of life, Angus finally gasped and opened his eyes. Overjoyed, he saw Crusoe standing nearby. Meanwhile, Hamilton learned there were no enemy boats in the area, but he still ordered his men to keep firing at the water. When he waded ashore, Crusoe slipped back beneath the waves. Annie rushed to Angus's side, relieved he was alive. Angus tried to explain about Crusoe, but Annie, thinking it was a child's fantasy, told him to stop imagining things. At that moment, Crusoe emerged from the sea, and Annie realized Angus had